All right, guys, we're going to get into ancient Egypt today. The first thing I wanted to talk about with ancient Egypt is just this fact right here. It says Egyptian art, like Egyptian culture, can be defined by its stability and continuity. The Egyptian Empire was around for approximately 3,000 years, and art and culture didn't change very much during that time. I think that is just really fascinating to me. 3,000 years of pretty much not a lot of change in the culture. If you think about our culture, the America, in America, we've been around what, 250 years, something like that. Think of all of the change that we have had in our culture in those 250 years, and to think of a culture that was that stable for that long, 3,000 years, to me is just mind blowing. I mean, it was. Stable enough where if you looked at hieroglyphics or their writing style of that time, and you saw the fashions and the way that people dressed in the hieroglyphics in the Old Kingdom, and you looked at the New Kingdom, 3,000 years later, you could still tell, okay, this guy's a scribe because of the way he's dressed. This guy's a pharaoh because of the way he's dressed. Maybe some of that stability was because they did have a pictorial or a visual language, and so there were some consistencies or things that were kind of kept the same, at least in documentation. But it is weird to think of a culture that was that stable for that long. I think that is the thing that blows me away, was just that. Now, there weren't. That doesn't mean there weren't periods of strife, that there weren't periods where the whole system collapsed and it had to be rebuilt at some point. But we are going to look into all of that stuff during this lecture. It is usually broken up into about three periods that we're going to look at: the Old, Middle, and New Kingdoms. But before we get into that, let's talk about Egypt, kind of what it was like. The first thing I wanted to get into was just sort of its geographical location. Let me show you a map here, if I can find it here. There is a map of Egypt. Now, if you look at this map, you can see that it's defined by its most important geographical feature, which is the Nile River. That Nile River we see here, and it is flowing, unlike rivers in the United States, this river flows from the south to the north. Most of our rivers flow from the north to the south, but in Egypt we see the river flowing the opposite. It is flowing from the south to the north. So when we see the terms Upper Egypt on this map and then the term Lower Egypt, that is because of the way that the river is flowing. The upper is south and the lower is north, which kind of doesn't make sense to us, but that is why it says that. Now, the Nile is the world's longest river. It flows north for about 4,000 miles. And at 6 points in the river, it passes over these outcrops of rocks known as cataracts. And what they are is basically just large waterfalls. And at the northernmost one of these, called the First Cataract, which we can see here at the bottom of the map, that is where the Nile enters the Lower Egypt at Aswan. And each year, that river would flood because of rainfalls and melting snow south in the Ethiopian highlands coming from the mountains. And when the waters would receive, it would leave this fertile black soil all around that river. Now, the rest of the soil was this red kind of desert soil, but around the river, it had this fertile black soil. And that's why you see all of these cities around this Nile River. Everyone kind of built around the river because that's where the fertile soil was. And so that's where everybody settled, where, there was fertile soil where you could raise crops and grow things. It said that led the Egyptians to call their land the Black, or Kemet, Kemet, as opposed to the desert, which was called the Deseret, or the red soil. And so that is sort of the two different types of soil, or the two different types of places that were in Egypt: the black soil and the red soil. And you wanted to be in the black soil. Now, the first section we're going to look at is the Old Kingdom. Now, there were some pre-dynastic periods and everything else where there wasn't a consistent culture. But we're going to start with the Old Kingdom, where those cultures come together. Now, there were some sort of northern Egypt and southern Egypt, but I wanted to show you this. This is the palette of Narmer right here. This palette, they call it a palette. It is made out of silestone. It is a large kind of a stone, well, especially when it comes to different palettes. What these palettes were traditionally used for was to grind up the ingredients and put the oil in them and stuff to make the eye makeup that we kind of associate with ancient Egyptians. When we think of ancient Egyptians, a lot of the times you see images of them and they're wearing this black kind of an eye makeup. The men and the women are. Now that eye makeup was actually practical back then. The eye makeup, when they put it under their eyes and around their eyes, it kind of acted almost like sunglasses. It reduced glare, since they were living a lot of the times in these kind of desert places with a high sun. It almost acted like sunglasses. We see football players doing the same thing now, where they put the black under their cheeks or under their eyes when they're playing football to kind of reduce the glare. That's the same thing that the ancient Egyptians were using that black eye makeup for. Sure, it might have been stylish too. I mean, I remember, there were some kids in my high school who liked to wear black eye makeup all the time, the goth kids, hanging out at the Great American Cookie. That was probably not for reducing glare, unless it was reducing glare from their phone screens. I don't know. But anyway, that is what these palettes were usually used for. Usually they were a little smoother than this and not as large as this. This one is a pretty large makeup palette and a pretty highly decorated makeup palette as well. So it is a little different than the traditional ones that we're used to seeing. I wanted to kind of talk about some of the imagery on here. This is unusual for a couple of different reasons. One is because of all of the stuff that's going on the palette. If we look at the palette, we will see a couple of different things. It is decorated on both sides. And when we look at this, we see a couple of things kind of stand out. One is it looks like the imagery is set into registers. If you look at these sort of horizontal bands that go across the palette, we see that everything is kind of segmented, and each one of those little bands kind of tells a story, almost like a comic book does now. And so I think that that's kind of unusual. And if we start kind of identifying some of the stuff that's going on, let's look at some of this and kind of talk about it. Now, let's look at the one on the right first. Now, if we look at this, we have on the one on the right on the top, we have these kind of horned creatures. We think that that is the head of a goddess called Hathor. That is what that's supposed to represent. Between the two goddesses of Hathor, we do see Narmer's name is written with symbols of a catfish, kind of between those two parts of the head. And then we also see Narmer below that in the second register. We see Narmer with his sandal bearer, which is somebody that we see on the other side with him too. And he's wearing the red crown of Lower Egypt. When we see his crown, it kind of has a curl on it, and that was kind of significant. It meant that he was from Lower Egypt. And he's also, I don't know if you can make it out, but he's wearing a bull tail also. And he's wearing that same bull tail on the other side as well. The tail of a bull. A lot of the times the pharaoh was thought of as like a strong bull. The priest, there's a priest in front of him, and then ahead of him are some of his soldiers carrying, it looks like heads on pikes right there. Next to, or after that, we see all these decapitated heads, where they have the heads, and they say that they were also castrated as well, but we see the heads between their legs, and those are his foes that he is, I guess, probably destroyed and decapitated and castrated. I don't know if the castration was done post death or before death. I would think it would be more efficient, before death. Anyway, painful. That'd be horrible. Also, when we look at below that in that register, we have these what are called Seroparards, which was I don't even serperiards. I don't even know how to pronounce it really, but they were this mythical animal. They kind of look like lions, or the cross between a lion and a giraffe, with these kind of really long entwined necks. And in between those necks is a circle, and that circle is where they think that they would have put the materials to grind up the makeup for. That little circle in that hole is where they would probably grind the makeup. And then on the bottom, we do see the king, maybe represented as a bull, knocking down the walls of a city. So that is one of the sides of the palette. Like I said, that is the one that shows him wearing the crown of Lower Egypt. And then on the other side, we have him sort of wearing the garb of a pharaoh or a king from Upper Egypt. Now, in this one, we see the same thing kind of on the top, but we also see him with the sandal bearer. He's standing there. We see that hierarchy of scale that we saw that was from the ancient Near East. We see Narmer as larger than everybody else. He has a sandal bearer with him. He's wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt. It kind of looks like a bowling pin. He's still wearing that bull tail. He has the royal beard on, the pharaonic kind of goatee that we kind of associate with pharaohs. And then also a kilt. Here he is smiting a foe. This is called the mace pose. We see it several times in other artworks too. It's used for the next 3,000 years. And it's also refers to as kind of the smiting pose. When we see somebody about to kill somebody, this is the pose that they're usually in. And it's illustrated a lot in ancient Egyptian culture. So this is he is about to smite a foe right here. And then underneath it, we see some more dead people down on the bottom of it. We also see up kind of above him is this falcon with a human arm, and that is supposed to be the god Horus. And that human arm is holding a rope that we think is binding the foe, the foe's head. And so the god, or the falcon, is also emerging kind of from a marsh, which we think might be kind of representative of Lower Egypt. So that one of the interpretations of this palette was that it had something to do with the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt. Since we see markers and identifiers from both of them, and then him wearing the garb of the king of the Upper and of the Lower, it shows that we think that he was the pharaoh that kind of, or the first king that kind of unified both of those areas together into one dynasty. And so that is why this is as important as it is. Once again, it was found in a tomb, or actually in a temple, buried beneath the floorboards of a temple. They think that this was probably given in tribute by some, maybe a pharaoh or other rich people. They would give these votive kind of presents to the temples to show their faith. And after a while, they'd run out of room, so they'd start burying all of this stuff under the floorboards. And so that's where this one was found. I did want to get into sort of their religion, since we were talking about temples of the ancient Egyptians. They were polytheistic. They believed in more than one god for most of the time. They originally consisted of local gods or cults that were confined to a particular region or district. But it said after the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, the importance of the local deities increased or diminished with the military or political fortunes of their districts. That is a lot like when we were talking about the ancient Near East. The same kind of thing was kind of going on with them as well. Hold on, I'm trying to look up a note here. They also, it said single God's spheres of influence could overlap or intersect. They could have different aspects, and they could, have multiple gods that shared some of the same aspects. And maybe it's because they came from a different place, but you could worship both of them if you wanted to, depending on how in or out of favor they were.